welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Casey and I'm the designer behind Pattern Scout. So this week I'm going to be finishing that little linen blue peasant dress that I cut a few weeks ago when I was doing a batch cut of 3 linen dresses. This is a relatively simple self-drafted pattern and I'm going to show you how to draft it if you're interested in drafting it yourself. But if you're like, Casey, okay, come on, don't make me draft a pattern. I just want the pattern. You're in luck because I have created a kind of simple graded pattern for this, but there is a little bit of a caveat. So I have talked a little bit about wanting to start a Patreon page, and I have decided to do that, and I'm going to be offering this pattern as a perk for my Patreon members. So the pattern comes in US sizes 0 through 30, my normal size range. It's just a graded pattern with sizing and yardage info and a few other, kind of boilerplate information items in the pattern, but it does not include instructions or illustrations for the instructions. This video is going to serve as the instructions for the pattern. I've included a link to the Patreon page in the video description, so check that out for all of the information about the Patreon membership and the perks included with that. And while the pattern is currently only being offered as a member perk for my Patreon subscribers, I may eventually turn it into a pattern that I sell on my website, depending on the type of feedback that I get from the Patreon members. So if you are interested in having first access to this pattern and getting to see a little bit, of a behind the scenes sneak peek at what's going on with me and Pattern Scout, and also have the opportunity to give me feedback on a pattern that is in the works, be sure to check out my Patreon page. And if you're not too keen on joining Patreon, I totally get that, and I appreciate your support no matter how you give it to me. So whether you're watching my videos here or buying my patterns or supporting me on Patreon, it is all very much appreciated and very, very helpful. So thank you. Okay, let's get back to this dress. I'm using this really lovely blue linen that I found on Amazon. I've been extremely happy with the quality of this fabric. I've made 3 different dresses out of it now, and I'll put a link in the description to that if you're interested in checking that out. The only special notion that you're going to need for this project is some elastic thread to create the shirring on the bodice of this garment. So this is the shirt version of this peasant blouse that I've made for myself. I just did some shirring along the underbust and at the waist, and I also used the shirring to create the little puff sleeves here, and then for the neckline I've just gathered it with a drawstring. I've now made this pattern 3 times and have been very, very pleased with it. I've made this top that you see here. I have a dress that I made that was a little bit longer, kind of a maxi length dress that I shared a couple of videos back. And today I'm going to be making an above the knee length dress. And if you stick around to the end of the video, I'll show you how I plan to style all of these pieces for summer and transitioning into fall. Alrighty, let's get to drafting. And if you want to skip the drafting step, I'll put a timestamp here for where to go for the actual tutorial. Okay. I'll be using my bodice sloper as the base for drafting this pattern, and that's just because I already have this drafted on my computer, and I have a Skillshare course on how to draft a bodice sloper on your computer. I'll link that in the description box below. You can also use a t-shirt if you want to draft this by hand. You don't want to do this on the computer. You can use kind of a boxy fit t-shirt that's not too oversized as the starting point for this draft. Just fold it in half. I've left about 2 to 3 inches on the sleeve length, and first I'm going to split the sleeve in half at the shoulder point to divide it into the front sleeve and the back sleeve. And I'll set the back bodice and the back sleeve aside and just work with the front sleeve and the front bodice for this draft for now. Align the underarm and the shoulder of the sleeve and the bodice. This doesn't have to be perfect, I'm just trying to get a basic T shape, and the shoulder will overlap at the top of the sleeve cap. Starting at the neckline, I'm just going to draft that T shape around the sleeve and down the side seam. And if you're using your boxy tee, it will look like this, basically the same. I'll use that same T shape on the back bodice, aligning it with the edge of the neckline as well. And now I can start drafting the necklines of the front and the back bodice. So I'm going to start with the front, and I just want to find my bust kind of radius. This is basically going to help me decide how far down I want to bring that front square neckline. This is just going to vary from person to person, so I'm doing it about 3¼ inches from my bust point. I'll just draw a line from the center of the shoulder down to the top of the bust radius and just have that neckline skim the top of that bust radius. For the back bodice, I'm just going to start again at the center of that shoulder and have a line that curves perpendicular into the center back. And I'm just bringing the center back down maybe an inch or so. Now I have the basic shapes drafted. I just want to separate the sleeves from the bodices now. I'll draw a line from the underarm to the corner of the front neckline for the front bodice, and then I'll draw a line from the underarm to about maybe 1/4 of the neckline on the back bodice near the shoulder. And I've also made sure to mark notches to indicate the back and the front for the sleeve and the bodice so that I can line those up properly later. Now I can separate those pieces, and I have the front bodice, the back bodice, the front sleeve, and the back sleeve. Now I just want to combine the front and the back sleeve again at that center cut that I made from the shoulder. And I also want to make sure that the notches are on the outside of the sleeve, so you want that long center piece to be aligned at the center. Then I'll just kind of clean up the sleeve a little bit and make the edges look all nice and neat and pretty. And I've also added a little bit of curvature to the arm size of this raglan sleeve. This is what we've created as a raglan sleeve. So I'll take the sleeve over to my bodice pieces and align each of the sleeve edges with the corresponding bodice and true those edges so that they match up and have the same curve. Now we have the basic front bodice, back bodice, and sleeve drafted, and we need to add an ease to accommodate for all of those gathers and the shaping of the shirt or the dress. You can add anywhere between 1.3 to 1.5 times the width for the ease. I went with 1.4, just kind of right there in the middle. So I'm just going to expand the center front bodice, center back bodice, and the center of the sleeve and leave the arm side portions untouched. You do not want to add ease to those areas. Those will remain the same. Then we just need to add seam allowance. I went with 3/8 inch seam allowance or 1 centimeter. And then at the neckline on the front bodice, back bodice, and sleeve, I added a little bit extra, so it's probably closer to a 1/2 inch there. And the center back and center front do not need seam allowance because those will be cut on the fold. Next, I'll just add grain lines, fold lines, and lengthen the bodice. So for the top version of this, you can lengthen the bodice approximately 4-ish inches. For the mini dress version, you'd want to lengthen probably about 20 to 22 inches. And for the maxi length version, you'd probably want to lengthen anywhere between 40 to 42 inches from the waist. Okay, that does it for the drafting. Now we can cut the fabric. I already had my pieces cut out because I did them in a batch cut a few weeks ago. So now I'm just drawing lines on the front and back bodice for where I want to sew the shirring on this dress. For the front bodice, I'm just doing one shirring location under the bust, and for the back bodice, I'm doing it all the way from the neckline to that same under bust location on the back. So you can see there all the lines. I was originally thinking I might do 2 rows of shirring on the front bodice, but I think I'm actually just going to do 1. Now I just want to serge the top edge of the front bodice and the back bodice. If you don't have a serger, you can use a zigzag or overlock stitch on your sewing machine. This is just going to help finish those edges and keep them from fraying later. I'll also serge the top and bottom edge of both of the sleeves. Now I'm ready to start shirring the bodice. So I've got my elastic thread here. I'm just going to manually wind this onto my bobbin, not too tight, not too loose. You just kind of want to do it without stretching out the elastic thread too much. I'll load that into my bobbin case, and I also want to release the tension on the bobbin case by turning the screw just about 1/4 inch to the left. And I'm just using regular all-purpose thread for my needle thread. I feel like I've been sewing a lot of shirring lately, so you've probably already seen this if you've seen my last couple of videos. But to sew the shirring, I'm just going to sew in rows. When I get to the end of a row, I'm going to pivot and turn and sew the next row. I'm sewing the rows about 1/2 inch apart, and I will continue doing this down the entire portion that I want shirred on this back bodice. When you need to change out your shirring thread, if you run out of thread, I just pull it to the wrong side, tie a little knot, and then pick up the stitching where I left off. After all of my rows are sewn, I'm just going to give this a good press with a little bit of steam. I also like to use that misting bottle to add a little steam. Sometimes I just don't like putting water in my iron, personal preference. And this is going to also help kind of shrink up that shirring just a little bit more and make it a little bit more stretchy and bouncy. So here is the front bodice. You can see I've just done a couple of rows right under the bust on the front bodice, and I'm going to align the sleeve with the front bodice now right sides together. And because the sleeve is cut on the bias, it may kind of seem like it doesn't really want to line up. It may get a little bit stretched out. So just kind of ease it in with your fingers and, kind of squish it back into place. It should line up. With both of the sleeves attached to the front bodice, I can now attach the back bodice right sides together with the back portion of the sleeve in the same way that I did. Again, just kind of easing in that seam, making sure everything lines up nicely. When I sewed my shirring on the back bodice, I made sure not to go all the way to the edge because I don't want to inadvertently trim off the shirring with my serger blade. You want to make sure you keep all of that shirring intact so that it doesn't come unraveled. Now I just want to create a channel around the entire neckline. This is where I'm going to insert the drawstring. So I'm folding this down by a 1/2 inch toward the wrong side and pressing in place. I also need to create an opening for the drawstring to be inserted and tied in the front, so I'm just going to cut a little slit in the center front bodice that's about 2 to 3 inches long. I'll finish the edge of that slit with my serger, and then I'll just fold it down and top stitch it in place. Then I can top stitch that fold for the drawstring channel down around the entire neckline. When you get to the parts where the sleeve meets the bodice, you may kind of have to ease that in. And when I'm sewing across the back bodice with all of that shirring, I want to make sure that I stretch it as I sew. I'm also going to add pockets to this dress, so I've made myself a little notch where I want the top of the pocket to be located, and I'm attaching the pocket right sides together with the edge of the skirt on this dress. Once I sew the pocket to the bodice, I'm also going to serge the edge of just the pocket there so that I can finish that before I finish the side seam. I'll also press that pocket open away from the skirt and understitch the pocket to the seam allowance on the pocket side. I'll do this for both sides of the front and back bodice. Once I have all of the pocket pieces attached, I can align the front and back bodice at the side seams, making sure to align the pocket edges, and I'll pin everything in place along the sleeve seam, side seam, and around the edges of the pocket and down the skirt of the dress. Then I can just sew everything together in one seam. Kind of messed up a little bit and sewed the pocket to the wrong side on the back bodice, but I was feeling kind of lazy and I just didn't really want to fix it. So you can see there how it's supposed to look on the front and then the wrong serged edge showing on the back. For the drawstring of the neckline, I'm just ripping 2-inch wide strips from my fabric, and this is like one of the most satisfying things to do. Anyhow, I ripped a couple of strips just to make sure that I had plenty of length in that drawstring. I'll have to piece some of it together. Then I pressed the fabric nice and flat and did a little cleanup on it, kind of trimmed some of the edges to get the frayed edges off. I am using my bias tape maker to fold this strip of fabric into a strap, so I'm essentially folding the exterior edges into the center, and then I'll fold that in half to conceal all of those raw edges, and I'll just top stitch it in place. I'll use a safety pin to help guide my drawstring through that channel, and that is what's going to gather the neckline and make it fit really nicely around the neck. I'll just fold a 1/2 inch hem in the sleeve, press that in place, and then I'm going to sew this with my shirring thread in the bobbin the same way that I did to shirr the back bodice and the front bodice. And this is going to kind of help gather that sleeve and create that little puff sleeve. Now this linen fabric was a little bit on the thick side, so it didn't get super shrinky after I sewed about 3 rows of the shirring onto the sleeve, but I think it'll shrink up a little bit more after I wash it. The last step is to hem the dress. I'm doing a wide hem, about 1.5 inch folded twice, because I wasn't sure if I was ready to commit to the length. So I did like the length, so I'm gonna leave it, but I'll just top stitch that in place to finish the dress. Okay, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and you enjoy this pattern if you do either draft it or get it on Patreon. There are other perks included with the Patreon membership, so just check out that link. It'll give you all the details. If you did enjoy this video and you like videos about sewing, please be sure to subscribe and hit the little bell icon. That way you'll be notified when I release new videos in the future. And yeah, I think that is all I have for you today. I will see you in the next video. Bye.